And we're live. So welcome to this DAORushWeek event. It's a Common Stack AMA. We're just going to dive right into it. So welcome to. Thank you so much for coming. Event. And we should the members of the Common Stack should probably just introduce ourselves. So I'm Griff Green, and I have been working with Giveth for a long time. Before this, was part of the White Hat group and part of the original DAO, the Slockit team that made the DAO. And now I'm kind of product manager, I guess, for the Common Stack. And I'll pass it to Jeff.
Hey everybody, I'm Jeff with the bad microphone. I was doing a lot of research in the blockchain space around bonding curves and curation markets, and I actually put together a presentation for a local cryptocurrency meetup and wrote an article about it and sent it around to a few people, and Griff called me up and said, hey, let's build that. So that's was the early days of the Common Stack. So yeah, it's been a great ride of token engineering research and lots of fun ever since. And I will pass it to Kris.
Hi, so yes, I'm Kris, and I will be going through some questions with you today that you can ask in the chat. And so I do communications for the Common Stack together with Jeff. And before the Common Stack, I was working on Giveth. I'm still working, doing communications for Giveth, and I'm very happy to see all of you here today. And I give it to Lorelei.
Hey y'all, I'm Lorelei, or Loey, and I have been working with the Common Stack since the beginning, doing project management and lots of human stuff. Decentralized HR is how I like to label myself. And I've also done that with Giveth. And Giveth was my entry into the blockchain community. Before that, I was spending a lot of time in justice system reform and alternatives, and looking at how we decentralize those sorts of public services, before I ever knew about these communities. So that's my passion, what brings me here, and I'm so excited to have you all. And God, I'm really excited about this first question. I actually really want to know the answer to it. So I'll pass it to Z first to introduce himself.
So I'm Zargam. I am a complex systems scientist and systems engineer. I got interested in the sort of blockchain space in the 2015 period, but I've actually been working on algorithmic policy, multi-agent systems, and sort of coordination, emergence of coordination in decentralized systems since the early 2000s. I really kind of got the bug when I realized that this made a lot of the theory that we use in things like robotics or other fields useful in economic social systems. Been very excited by the contributions that the Common Stack team, the Giveth team, and others had been making to practicalizing some of these things. And I got involved after I met Griff in Switzerland. And I've been collaborating mostly because I sort of care about things making it to practice as opposed to just sort of science. Loey, feel free to run with the questions.
Fantastic. Okay, thanks, Z. I think so. That is our core team, and so we have already some questions in the chat here. So we'll jump right in. But I first want to ask a general question, just in case, like for people who have never heard of the Common Stack and they're just jumping in for the first time. I want to ask the question: what is the Common Stack? What do we do? Why are we here? Griff.
Yeah, so the goal of the Common Stack is to create a sustainable funding for public goods. This is why we're here. We believe that communities that are working to build a better world for themselves and for the greater world are creating value. There's this weird thing that civil society and the organizations within it, that the value they create isn't appreciated. It's not rewarded. It's not recognized by the market economy that we live in. This is especially the case for, and really more explicitly the case for what is called non-excludable goods. These are things that it's hard to keep people from using, right? Like if you clean the air, everyone gets to enjoy it. But there's really no way to create a business model in our current market economy around cleaning the air, because there's a free rider problem and you can't really charge a customer because everyone's a customer. And so the goal with the Common Stack is to allow people who want to create value for their community that is non-excludable and free for all to use. We wanted to make it so that can be rewarded and recognized and appreciated by the community in an economic way, as well as social ways. So that's our core goal. And the way we want to do that is with really advanced token economics. And that's where Z really comes in, because he's deep in the rabbit hole. But yeah.
Great. Thanks for that great introduction. And so that's perfect to like indeed dive into like some more technical questions that we have here. So we have one from Flo Mac, and the question is it possible to implement ABC, so that's our augmented bonding curve, after the token is launched? And if yes, what are the implications? So I don't know if Griff wants this or Zargam.
I can take it unless Z wants it.
Sure, I'll start and say this depends quite a bit on your software architecture decisions, your implementation decisions. So in principle, as long as you have contracts that are upgradable or otherwise you have what you need to make changes, there's nothing that would stop you from doing that. But I think that it does actually depend a lot on what you released originally, because the equipment that comes with the ABC manages the supply of the token. And so if you don't have the ability to do that, then it won't be necessarily compatible with the original logics. Griff, you have sort of further comments. I tend to answer sort of, we'll say mathematically, it's possible, but in terms of implementation details, especially considering what you released initially, it could be very hard.
Yeah, it's pretty hard, and not only technically but socially, to start issuing new currency, because that's what the augmented bonding curve allows you to do. I won't define the augmented bonding curve, but we have a lot of articles about it if you guys want to read and understand exactly what that is. But in summary, as far as it relates to this question, when you have a bonding curve, there's no supply limit. So like, for instance, Bitcoin, they have a social agreement around 21 million. It's not going to work. You can't just start a bonding curve and have it connected to Bitcoin. But maybe, for instance, Ether, maybe there could be a bonding curve related to it. It would have to be, or maybe let's say an Aragon token. Aragon actually did it. They had the ANT token and they converted it to, you can use the ANT token and convert it to ANJ, which is a bonding curve token in a way. And so there's different ways that you can play with the bonding curve and make it a part of your protocol. But the implications are that you're gonna have a second market for your curve, for your bonding, or for your token. So there's gonna be arbitrage opportunities between wherever your token's being traded now and that bonding curve. And it's going to be really complex. And what I would say is I don't necessarily think that the augmented bonding curve or any bonding curve is ready to just be like another piece of some other system, at least not one that's important.
Maybe the better way to think about it is that the bonding curve establishes a relationship between two tokens. In a way, it creates a bond between the supply of a token and, say, a reserve of a reserve token, whether it's Ethereum or DAI or whatever. That creating that relationship creates a web, and that has extra effects. And so it's not as simple as saying plugging in the bonding curve and getting the properties of the bonding curve. What you're really getting is the properties of the bonding curve combined with the properties of the things you connected with, and new properties that come from the combining itself. And actually, I think that's the real heart of why crypto economics is challenging, is because it's not about the parts. It's actually often about the relationships between the parts. And we want to be really rigorous and careful about how we combine things. But ultimately, there's also this real need to better understand what people want and need. And I'm going to kind of end this thread on the ABC by kind of pointing it back at the sort of social level of these systems and say you wouldn't add the bonding curve unless the people using the system needed the properties that adding the bonding curve would give the new system once you added it.
Okay, so thanks for that answer. So more questions are coming in, so it's really nice to see. And a second question that we have here is, how do you prevent value to exit the network over time after the vesting is over with, after the vesting is gone? So maybe you could explain a little bit more about like the redistribution process. That would be awesome. So maybe this is one for you, Jeff.
Sure, yeah. First, I'll describe the vesting process itself. So what sets apart the augmented bonding curve and the common stack from a lot of other bonding curves is there's an initialization period at the beginning, and which we call the hatch phase. And this is where initial supporters of the community initiative kind of get a average cost tokens for their contribution. So rather than each purchase going to the bonding curve, you kind of have a bulk buy, which initializes the bonding curve. And these tokens, part of these tokens or part of the value that is put into the curve goes to the funding pool. The rest of the reserve stays in the reserve pool. And these tokens are kind of the initial tokens that are issued by the bonding curve. Now, this gives hatchers a lot of governance over the community. So we make sure to rein that in with a vesting period. So when the curve goes live, they can't just sell all their tokens and make a profit. We want to make sure that they're in this for the long haul, that their incentives are aligned with the community using this economic tool to produce value in that community. So the way the vesting works is there would be, I mean, you can customize it according to your community needs, of course. Our initial thoughts are, and what we've worked with in simulations in CAD is a 2-month shelf where all tokens are, hatch tokens cannot be sold for 2 months. And then there's kind of a token drip that follows a half-life curve. So the tokens kind of gradually vest. There is no, one day where all the tokens are suddenly vested, because then you can have all sorts of liquidity issues and sell-off risk. So the tokens are gradually vested to the hatchers that participated in the initial instantiation of the bonding curve. So the question is, once that vesting period is up, how does value, or what's preventing everyone from selling and leaving the bonding curve and exiting the community? So I guess I'd like to draw a parallel with real world. This could be compared with stocks of a company like Apple stock or Google stock. There's nothing really preventing anyone from selling and kind of the run on the bank to occur. But by the time this vesting period is up, we have the idea that the community would be producing value. So the community is using the tokens and the money that's generated by the bonding curve throughout the vesting period to create value in whatever way that community creates value. Maybe that's open source code, maybe that's cleaning up trash on a beach, maybe that's housing homeless people. And by the time this vesting period is up, the value is not just in the token. That's kind of in the beginning, in the early days, before the community has a chance to produce value with this money, it's kind of only a financial tool. But by the time the vesting period is over, the community is full on producing value in whatever way that community decides to do so. And so this might operate more like a kind of like a stock for a community. You can see a run on the bank, perhaps, if this community is not producing value, in the same way that any company that is not performing well on the stock market sees its stock price tank, because people leave because they don't believe that company is producing value anymore. So this is kind of a loose correlation to how that might work in commons system.
Cool. Thanks for that answer, Jeff. Like a question like linked to this is like Adrian is asking, when ABC, when is this coming? When will the augmented bonding curve exist in the world?
When moon.
So what is our timeline? I can maybe start answering that because I'm also part of the common stack. It says so right here. So what we're doing right now is what we call staging of the common stack. So this is iteration 0. And so what we have been doing, we have an article out. We'll in the YouTube description, we'll also like link some articles and some things we talk about. And so iteration 0 is the moment, the time frame that we have reserved to explain some of the basic concepts and create also some of the deep dives in the communication. We're working on modeling, on simulation. We're also getting some elements ready for a larger fundraise that we want to do, because we have everything split up in iterations. So if you check the website, you can see that we have an entire roadmap to build all these components and these layers, the 4 layers that we have mapped out. And so the first layer is the funding layer for any future commons, and that is the augmented bonding curve. What is the timing for that? That depends on a number of things, but maybe Griff wants to say something extra about this.
Yeah. So really, an augmented bonding curve is just a bonding curve with a hatch and an exit tribute. It can be implemented now. The thing that we want to add is that these are complex systems, and there's a lot of parameters to tune. There's a lot of pieces and parts. It's not just a normal smart contract where you send in this much money and then this much money goes out. It's a much more complex system than that. So if we want to do a good job at it, we really need to have spend some time modeling in CAD and documenting it so that a lot of people can use it. We are looking at doing sort of a one-off augmented bonding curve for an early stage commons, but we're hoping to actually make it so that here's this open source product that everyone can use. Here's the CAD simulation, so you can tune your parameters and you can actually take the implementation that is matched to the CAD simulation and just deploy it and test it and try it in a way that it's likely to work, or that has a better chance to work. Yeah, Z?
Yeah, so I think one of the most important things about the ABC is that the ABC isn't a smart contract, it's a pattern, it's essentially a class. And so if you recognize the pattern, as Griff said, it's implementable today using existing bonding curve tools. It's essentially the same mathematics as the Bancor equation, which means one can use existing implementations, much like the Grassroots Economics team did with their bonding curve applications. But what I really want to emphasize here is that the pattern is the main deliverable from the common stack, and the understanding that an implementation that we would build or we would collaborate to build is a reference implementation, and it provides you a working example of the pattern, but that in practice the power comes from actually making minor adjustments that suit your particular use case. And so this sort of engineering way to think about this is that the sort of pattern serves as the starting point, but that for every particular application of the pattern, you're going to find differences that meet the needs of that specific example. And a lot of the effort here from the common stack is actually helping people lift from thinking about things in terms of code that's sort of copy pastable, lifting up to patterns that are reusable, but not reusable in the sense that they're exactly the same every time, but that the pattern part is the part that's the same, while leaving room for variability that meets the needs sort of to the local community or the local context. And so my answer is they're here now, but we're only seeing the first applications of it sort of in practice in sort of MVP settings and reference implementations.
Yeah, and so I wanted to add one more thing to that question on the complexity of the bonding curve and on the timing of all of this. When it comes to iteration 0, like another main thing that we do in iteration 0 is that we are building the trusted seed, because if you start a bonding curve, an augmented bonding curve, you have an initial group, a trusted group of people And we call this the trusted seed. So we're spending a lot of time on creating, like building this group of trusted pro-social experts, experts in token engineering. So just wanted to make a quick call out about that as well. So if you haven't applied for that, you can just go to commonstack.org/apply, because if you're here, that already shows that you're aligned with us, and then you should definitely join the trusted seed. And that's a big element of what we're doing and focusing on right now. Okay, then I'm maybe gonna quickly skip forward a little bit because it's related. I think Adrian was asked the question about like when is the augmented bonding curve coming, and so then he asked like it would be nice to see the code. Complexity, and so in all seriousness, it would be nice to see the code. Complexity and solidity is a devil. So having a decay function with graduated withdrawals sounds nice, but would be a nightmare to audit. So that is like a bit the question on like, yeah, where can we already look at what currently exists, I guess, mainly.
Well, we have this project that Danny's working on actually with us on the Commons simulator. And we have 2 sets now of CAD simulations of the augmented bonding curve attached to conviction voting. The first ones that Zargam has made, and now we brought on another CAD designer to help us iterate on top of those to make them really make them work for the common simulator basically. And so we have a couple sets, and they're in the common simulator repo. The best thing to do though, if you really want to dive in, is to join the CSTK EV Telegram channel. So t.me/CSTK DDev, because our goal is not to actually have a dev team. Our goal is to, oh, thank you, Adrian. Yeah, you can. Our goal is to have a design team, but we want to make sure that we don't end up with a monopoly over the expertise on implementing these things, because we've seen that happen with other blockchain projects. And we really want this to be a community effort that's not stuck on one chain or stuck on one implementation. So we're focused on having a decentralized dev team, and that's the channel where we share all of our work and try to get people involved. Yeah, and if you missed that, again, we'll add it in the description and here in the chat if we find a moment in between. And also, if you are just in the CommonStack Telegram, that's an easy one to remember, t.me/CommonStack. There at the top, you see all the links pinned to our different channels. So I haven't heard Lorelei talk yet, so I'm going to ask a question that she can maybe kick off. And the question from Max is the Common Stack best used to be overlaid on existing Commons communities, or is it best to use to be used in parallel, or to create define the community from the ground up?
Great question, because we have to know like where we're at and who we're meeting and the situations that we're coming into. You know, that fluency with the local conditions that Ostrom and many others put emphasis on. And I think that this question depends, or the answer to it depends, where there's like several pieces of the Common Stack tech that that are modular and can be used by different communities. And it really depends on like where you are at with your community, because a big part of what we are trying to do and bring and document and provide education on that hasn't really been talked about in this call yet so much is the cultural build. And these elements of understanding the nature of a community on the ground. What are the type of people that are a part of it, and what are their needs, and what are their resources? What do they have access to? Who are the leaders? What are their decision-making strategies? Their parameters, all of that. And so a big piece of having a commons, a successful one, is that all of these elements of the culture are right and are clear and aligned. And we're building a cultural playbook for people to to develop that and flesh that out if they haven't figured it out for themselves already yet. And one of the things that we name as really important is having a community steward. Pretty much freaking crucial to having a successful commons is a really dedicated community steward. But some communities already have that, right? So there's several communities that I would think of as great commons who are so far ahead on the cultural build that it's like, yeah, if you guys feel aligned, then you're probably ready to move on to using the tech and launching an ABC. But then some people like are just starting to organize around a topic. It's a community that's never existed before, or it's a new one in that locale, in which case maybe they would start at the cultural build step of using the common stack before, you know, to socially validate things and strengthen them before moving on to being on blockchain and having bonding curve funding mechanisms and all that. Yeah, so to me, you can kind of meet communities where they're at with the tech is the short answer. And some of it is really social tech. That's important too.
I think it's important to remember that you have to, because all of these technologies are essentially automated administration of social processes. So if you're not actually looking at the social processes and sort of meeting them where they are, you're trying to force people to behave differently and things just break down. So the real challenge with the cultural build is to actually do this matching between what people need and what the tools provide them, and actually sort of iterating to the point where the tools and the needs actually fit each other. Because if they don't, it's not going to work out. No matter how great the people are, or how great the tools are, there has to be a sort of fit there. And so creating and cultivating that fit is a critical step in terms of having success in a DAO or in any sort of, you know, technology mediated social system.
Definitely. Yeah. And that's why indeed that we're saying that we're not a technical crypto organization. We design patterns, but they're and layers for governance, for funding, etc. And there's always a technical side to it. We have a technical roadmap and we have a cultural roadmap. And indeed, we will link up where the community is at that moment and make it fit. So we have a follow-up question that is linked a little bit to this one. Could you talk about some points of friction when overlaying these tools on communities, and how could these user barriers be overcome?
Yeah, and
Kris?
I can take that one.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, there's for me the biggest friction when it comes to community and relationships and all of that is money. Money is just a horrible thing sometimes. Like it's the best tool for ruining relationships. Like if you need to really destroy a relationship, just bring in some money into the equation and everyone gets mad at each other. So that's a huge friction. And that's why the cultural build needs to be really respected and understood and given the time that it deserves, because it takes time for everyone to get aligned with expectations. Another friction is that, dude, blockchain stuff is hard. It's really going to have you're going to have major onboarding issues, and a lot of people won't understand the tech, and especially for the communities that we really want to end up working with. Yeah, they're not blockchain experts. And so one of the things that we're really excited about, that Kris already mentioned, is the ability to create a community of people who are more aware of how to use these commons. And you might not, and the people in this community, this is what we call the trusted seed. They might not be, we're going to try to get as many blockchain experts and token engineering experts in the trusted seed as we can. But the real core piece is there's a bunch of people that have used commons before and have seen successes and have seen commons that maybe could have done better. And we want to get them all to be kind of like plants in early commons, you know, like someone who's been through the whole game before. And then when they join a commons that's full of a bunch of people who have never played with this tech, they can kind of be you know, models about how to vote, and you know, they can help with some things. And so this is the really big friction that we constantly see in the world of blockchain, is trying to get people to understand how to use this tech. And so our big solution is the trusted seed. And that's why that's our first.
And the trusted seed isn't just token engineering experts. It's actually about building the sort of interdisciplinary understanding and language for communicating with each other, because you inevitably need people with experience in various forms of social organizations, not just startups, but people who've maybe worked at nonprofits or participated in other sort of community bottom-up environments that are not tech mediated. And you have people who have worked on the technology themselves, some who've worked on the actual implementations, others who have participated in the other sort of deployment and or management roles. I think what ends up happening is that we need an environment for these expertises to mix, like ways, like the difficulties to be worked through together by people with different perspectives and experience. And then all of those people retain some understanding of what it took to get through that working together. And they bring that understanding to other organizations. So we have both the trusted seed in the sense of the common stack as a DAO, as this community of people, this community of practice, and we're working on stuff together, but we don't want people to be defined by that. We want that to just be one set of experiences and knowledge. And then when they participate in other DAOs or help launch commons or really any other aspect of their life, they can bring a deeper understanding of how the social and the technological interplay with each other to create successful groups.
Yep, great. And like, yeah, I'm a little bit distracted because I was at the same time now just reading some questions. So, but thanks for that answer. A next question that we have that is going back a little bit to, well, practical/technical is from Flo Mac. Can we have a reserve of different tokens as collateral? So Jeff, maybe you want to take this one?
Yeah, for sure. So the typical bonding curve, if you've seen the diagrams before, there's a supply and reserve axis, or a lot of people do price and supply, but actually supply and reserve is the invariant property. So that's the one that we use. Now there isn't anything against adding another dimension for a different token, and then that way you kind of go from a bonding curve to a bonding surface. So you could imagine higher order functions that kind of have, rather than just one curve of that agents can move up and down depending on the amount of supply and reserve, but actually a whole surface or a manifold with multiple tokens in reserve that you could have liquidity between all of these various tokens. And actually, I think that's an area of research that's been going on at Balancer quite a bit, which is a spin-out project from Block Science. So maybe Zargham has a bit more context to give there.
Sure. I mean, on the overall patterns with multi-reserves, you have these balancer style contracts, which are just essentially n-dimensional versions of the ABC. And I actually sort of recommend those as tools when you need to have multiple reserve currencies, but we also keep in mind that it's a more complex version of the same sort of meta pattern, and it's not necessarily the best place to start. You would do that if you had a use case that really required multi-resource collateral pool, because these systems are weak to the devaluation of the collateral. So if the collateral were suddenly to become worthless, perceived as worthless, and in the outside world, then the things start to break down. And so when you add more collaterals, you increase the risk of a future scenario where one or more of the collaterals become like no longer relevant. It's nice because it's also risk mitigated in the sense that if you have the ability to remove collaterals, you can essentially be hedged. But I would say that at the level of community building, maybe that's not the place to start. The place to start is with something pretty robust, like a DAI or like an F as the reserve asset. I also saw a question which which is related from Flomac. I wanted to hit related to layering. So using a bonding curve token as the reserve for another bonding curve token is viable. So in this case, maybe you have a token that's for a really big community, and then that community has working groups or sub initiatives that are more targeted. You could actually do a bonding curve of the working group or the smaller group, which uses the bigger community as its reserve. And again, this reminds us that the reserve token really here is it's a unifying form of value. It's the external unit of value, but that's always relative, because the value of Ethereum or of DAI is a crypto community specific form of trusted value that we expect to be a good reserve. But then within my big community or my federation, we might have a bonding curve token that relates to that large org, but that's still too big to manage community style projects. And so you could imagine then taking that token in turn, using it as a reserve for a federation of small projects. So there's a lot of cool things that you can do by combining these patterns together, but a lot of that stuff we're going to have to figure out together, because it's not obvious what will work and when it will work in which social situations.
Okay, thanks.
Real quick, I do think it's
Sure.
worth just briefly saying that Aragon actually, their fundraiser app is built to have 2 tokens already. So and they do it mostly so that they can have A&T as a use case. And then there's an interesting dynamic where there's kind of an arbitrage opportunity with the 2 token system, where like if you set a ratio, now that bonding curve becomes like a Uniswap. And people actually start buying and selling into your curve to make these tokens that are in your curve balance as they should. And so it's kind of an interesting, it is an interesting use case and it has a lot of value, but our goal is always for the common stack is to keep things simple. We want to get a solid foundational model of like the most simple use case where it's a stable token like DAI and a bonding curve, you know, that's our goal. And then we can build off of that.
Great. So the next question we have here from August is if Giveth and like the common stack, if we have thought about the idea of a governance token that is really separate from something like ETH and that is contribution experience based, looking at reputation, involvement, consistency, and decision-making context, like a liquid democracy token that can only be earned and delegated for shared collective decision-making. We have definitely thought of this, and I'll give it to Z.
So as it turns out, the C-stack tokens that we use to denominate the sort of level of reputation or contribution in the trusted seed are actually very much this kind of token. We have not yet put in place a lot of formal governance procedures around asserting that, because we're still in this sort of what I would call the sense making or this discovery phase. People are contributing what they want to contribute, like adding value to the project by being members of our community. And we are doing a sort of iterative sense making process to like learn what's valuable, what other people find valuable, and attribute C-stack tokens or give praise, which you can see in our channels, and we're accumulating that into essentially balances of non-transferable tokens that are really just representative of the magnitude of your past contributions based on a pretty fuzzy social process. But as that goes on for longer, the community as a whole has a better understanding of, you know, the distribution and what it represents, and maybe improves our tuning of the processes and maybe further automates those processes into what eventually fills this niche of a sort of governance, reputation and governance token. From my experiences contributing to SourceCred, I can tell you that the evolution of SourceCred is very similar. It's very dog fooding centric, and it revolves around very discretionary, very social attempts to discover a process of assigning value to contributions that are sort of collective in nature, and the value is, you know, to the community. And over time, that's led to a set of algorithms that are being tuned and refined for that community. And so there's a lot of parallels. I would say that the current state of the Common Stack's efforts have been really effective for learning what the community values, and that when the trusted seed itself is sort of starting to become more directly involved in decision making, the weight of that decision making is going to come from this quantities of C-stack tokens. And I think it's important that we don't just view that as an algorithm that automates and says, ta-da, this is how valuable your contributions were, because the very idea of deciding how valuable contributions are is subjective and is prone to change over time. And that's why we think of these as governance like tokens, because they have to serve both the role of valuing contributions and the role of deciding and changing how we value contributions, which is very tricky. And I would say even the Commons Stack is doing its cultural build. And we're just inviting everyone to kind of participate through applying, and then, by getting into this group, actively contributing and gaining this CSTK reputation. I hope that answers the question. We can always have follow-ons or breakouts because it's a pretty important topic.
Yeah, well, breakouts we'll have at the end of the session. We'll have like an online town chat for people who want to ask more. But yeah, I think this was a clear answer, definitely. And just also so you know, like normally next week we'll have an article coming out on the CSTK token, so that you can learn a little bit more about this as well, and that it's what that token serves, what purposes this actually serves. And yeah, we'll also link to SourceCred. If you don't know it, you should definitely check it out. And then, so the next question might be partly answered already with this, but so Marina is asking, so she was an advisor to the founder of a participatory budgeting project. Is this similar in any way to how they incentivize the community to participate? And then I'm going to end there and then take the second half afterwards. Griff, you wanted to answer this one.
Yeah, so participatory budgeting is more like Gitcoin grants than exactly what we're doing, where it's the government says, hey, community, we would love for you to decide where this $1 million goes. And that's really awesome. And I love the way that Gitcoin solves this problem with quadratic funding and allows one person, one vote, but in a way where if they add funds to the projects, then they can kind of strengthen their vote. But the fact that they're an individual person has a more effect in it. I think that's the best way to spend other people's money, or to determine how to spend other people's money. What we're building or designing for is a slightly different, well, a very different use case, where actually communities take their own money and put it in a pot. And in that case, we still want to value the one person, one vote. It's very important because they have a unique perspective. So it shouldn't be a pure plutocracy, but it is it's a little bit easier to incentivize people to participate in this system because they built it themselves. It's not other people's money, it's their money. And so depending on when they came in and contributed those funds, and also how long they hold their opinions, we have this governance system called conviction voting, which is Michael Zargam, good old Dr. Zargam created. It's a really powerful solution for distributing your own funds as a community.
I think if I can add something there, the great thing about the fact that we are designing these as patterns rather than as one instance of a system, I think conviction voting could be an interesting application to allocating government funds in the case of participatory budgeting, because essentially what conviction voting is it's a real-time vote. It's like vote streaming or preference streaming, rather than casting your vote at one time that you think money should go to this park or this school. You can stream your preferences for where you would like to see government funds allocated in your community. So I think it opens up a much richer information source for governments, for communities managing their own money, in the case of the Commons Stack design, or for communities managing government funds, which I mean, essentially, tax funds are our own funds anyway. They're just at a larger scale of the nation state. So I think conviction voting could be a very interesting application for participatory budgeting as well.
On one comment on conviction voting too, though. So you said something that might strike people as a bit scary, where you're saying streaming preferences, because you can imagine people's preferences vary widely between people. They vary widely over time. They're very noisy and like variable and basically noisy in space and time if space is people. And so what's cool, at least the reason that conviction voting is something I put time into was having spent a lot of time on signal processing and sense making algorithms. What I realized is that what you need is a low pass filter, or a way of integrating all of that information into something that's less noisy. So although all of the individual preferences might be changing in time somewhat asynchronously and potentially in large amounts, the actual collective mass is going to move more slowly. And in fact, it has a layer of conviction, which is affected by how long you've held the same opinion. And that what this does is it smooths this large amount of noisy streamed preferences into something that's actually a bit more non-noisy and consistent, and you can actually decide against. So the goal is to kind of meet people where they are and take their preference streams that they can change sort of on their own discretion, but then actually meet the decision-making problem at where it is and provide it with a much more consistent, slow, time-varying sort of central tendency, but that central tendency is of this large mass of people over time. And that trying to get that mismatch matched through an algorithm is the goal of conviction voting, and we'll be experimenting with it more because we've been fortunate enough to collaborate with OneHive, who have actually been building smart contracts that implement the conviction voting algorithm. So
yeah, so again, for that one, you can you can check on our Medium for that. And I see Marina, you had a little follow-up question on that, I think. So Kris, maybe you can unmute Marina, or I can do that as well. Okay, go ahead, Marina.
I have a very basic challenge here. Because you are saying that I have money and it's people who already have money or already have tokens and it's about their time, what prevents me from saying funding my white school versus the black school, which is the #1 problem with funding? And this is a concern, huge, and that's why we do community organizing, or we figure out the taxes. So what if I already have money, then what happens to the black people or the Latino people that don't have the money?
Yeah, I mean, this isn't the best answer, honestly, but that's not necessarily our solution. Is governments have a value here, and larger communities making these things happen is important. The core basic thing that we're building is for people who have funds to allocate those funds for their own solution. So, I mean, I don't know if someone has a better answer than that.
I think that there's a couple things that are really important. And one is that for any decision-making system about allocating funding, you still need filters and screening for what gets on the table. So for starters, you're voting on proposals that are in a pool of potential proposals, and the rules for how you get things onto that list also greatly affect what comes out. I also think that it's important to remember that it doesn't have to be money. I think we have a tendency to think in terms of money, but not all tokens have to be transferable or purchasable. So in the case we were talking about the C-stack tokens earlier, which are non-transferable and largely generated through participation, you can imagine decision-making scenarios that leverage the same decision-making algorithm, but are not weighted by assets that are, thought of as money. They don't have a lot of moneyness. They can be highly reputation related, past contributions. They could be airdropped based on completely external signals, like these people don't have enough of a voice. Here's a non-transferable airdrop voice token. By the way, you can vote with these. The patterns themselves, kind of going back to the earlier discussions, they need to be put to work to achieve human ends. We don't need to look at them as copy-paste things. How do we use the tools we have to accomplish the goals that we have? And that means a lot of attention on the cultural build, which focuses on what are our goals and what combinations of tools meet those goals.
Yeah, and there's this really awesome tool called SourceCred, where you can bootstrap labor capital into a value. And I think that has the potential, when there's excess labor, to really make a change and be able to allow communities that want to create value with excess labor to create their own economy. And we want that to be part of the common stack. Once we get it, it's just scope.
Okay, great. I hope that answers your question a little bit, Marina. So we have a follow-up question that I'm taking this one beforehand because it's a little bit related. Do you see a more symbiotic way of combining quadratic funding and the augmented bonding curve in the future, where some compensation comes directly from the reserve, for instance, or where it helps to decide which projects are worth supporting? Kris?
Yeah. So the whole goal of the common stack is to create modular pieces. So the quadratic voting could easily be connected to ABC, and conviction voting and probably other governance methods. And maybe you'll have different types of proposals that will have different governance procedures for those different proposal types. And then on your second question, where some compensation comes directly from the reserve, and that's actually how the Aragon fundraiser app works right now with the TAP, where there is no funding. Well, the funding pool is in what we call a funding pool is just being slowly filled by the reserve at a set rate. But you could probably create some sort of algorithm that makes that set rate dynamic, and it could change through some kind of system. And I believe Jeff is working with some people to make kind of a generalized bonding curve design, and that would include the TAP as a function, the exit tribute, the entry tribute, and potentially even other funding pieces.
Okay, so I'll go to the next question because we have so many questions still and we're almost at an hour. So we'll probably take some of these into our chat afterwards. But the next one that I see here, I don't think we already answered this one. Is the augmented bonding curve implemented as a template in Aragon, or will it be?
Jeff, do you want to talk about the design that you were talking about before?
The generalized bonding curve? Yeah, for sure. So what we've seen in the bonding curve space is a lot of great ideas. And a lot of these, as Griff mentioned before, kind of the modularity of them, they can be combined in different ways that suit the context. So what I've been chatting with some researchers from Curve Labs and OneHive as well, and Zargam as well from Block Science, is creating a generalized bonding curve that has a lot of these different features. So there's the entry fee, exit fee, which you see in the common stack. There's the TAP, which you see in Aragon fundraising, and also a reverse TAP, which no one has really spoken about yet, but again, it may serve a use case. It also has the hatch and a couple of different alterations on that, depending on whether it's one token in reserve or multiple tokens in reserve. As Griff mentioned, again, with Aragon, with the ANT token in the bonding curve. And there are also, there's basically a very wide design space to explore here. A lot of the academic papers that Zargam has put out with the Vienna Research Institute of Crypto Economics has explored bonding curves as configuration spaces, which is a robotics engineering term, basically kind of defining the economic space that agents can act in. So you can think of this kind of like architecture, but for economics. So you're not saying what people will do, but you are providing kind of a structure to guide their behaviors, and you're able to get much richer simulation data off of potential agent interactions once you define them in the context of this bonding curve as a configuration space. Did I answer the question with that, or was there something more?
I think you answered it. Great. Okay, so I'm gonna do 2 more questions so that we stay a little bit within the time frame of an hour. So I see that Marina asked here, so she's not technical but has a strong governance background. So for greater understanding, can you share projects that are already working with you guys, or specific groups or people that you're trying to empower? So I can maybe start by giving an answer to that one. So we are definitely gonna try to scale slowly. because this is still very early days, and we're building complex solutions for complex systems, and we have to model and simulate and test a lot. So we will be starting with the plan right now is to start with a community, for example, the token engineering community, because they're doing exactly what we are working on. So they're like the logical people to go to. And so we see them as, in any case, one of our first commons. So it's going to be like first communities like this one, the token engineering commons. We'll have other very blockchain technical focused communities. And then slowly we'll be able to come up, as soon as we've tested and we've done a number of iterations, to just make it available as like a package for any sort of community. But that is still going to take a little while before we get there. I think I answered that one pretty completely, unless I missed something.
Well, yeah, I just want to add grassroots
Sure.
economics. Grassroots economics is like by far the coolest project in crypto. I mean, there's some other like interesting technical projects, but as far as like using advanced token engineering to make an impact on a community, they have, I believe, over 10,000 users in Kenya, on a lot of them using just normal feature phones, not smartphones, to move tokens around community, that their own community currency, that are balanced by bonding curves. It's incredible. Will Ruddick is like a superstar, but he's been doing this cultural build for 10 years. He's been working with community currencies in Kenya with these people for 10 years. And so, and he insulates them from the crypto. They don't actually hold the crypto. It's a custodial solution. There's and it's very hand wavy in some ways, but that's great because his focus was making an impact. Our focus isn't making a direct impact this year. Our focus is building a foundation so innovators can take our work and make an impact in their community. We know that we will not be able to be the technological saviors coming in from on high and solving the problems for people. We can't do that. People have to solve their own problems. We just hope to build the tools that they can use to make that happen.
Yeah, it's really inspiring to work with Grassroots Economics. It's a perfect example of a community that's live on the ground and like is really having an impact on these communities. So Jeff shared some links, and as said, we'll put some, for people who watch us on YouTube, we'll add some links there as well. So I'm actually happy to report that we covered all the questions, I think, that were asked here in the chat. Oh, Adrian, there you go with one more question. So like, we'll just maybe, we'll answer that one quickly, and then we'll move for people who have to go. So how does Giveth 2.0 fit into the common stack? Well, that's a great question, actually, because Giveth the common stack came into existence actually out of Giveth and block science. And so Giveth, our second component, our technical component that we want to build is the Giveth proposal engine. And so in the meantime, Giveth as a solution, as our donation platform, is going to continue to exist and to evolve. And we're currently working on the new version, which is Giveth 2.0. And yeah, so we have a number of people. Danny, for example, who's here also on the call, is also working on Giveth, and so that community is definitely moving forward. So you should definitely join if you want to. Any last words on Giveth or Lorelai? Yeah,
I'll just say a couple more things about it that maybe some people aren't familiar with what it is, but it's a proposal framework, but also serves as escrow and gives transparency and accountability to the dispersal of funds for people's work. So there's reviewers on milestones that hold the escrow for money donated until the work is done. And with that, it's like aiming to give a lot more trust into work that's being done by nonprofit type communities. It's important to me a lot because I came into this space from like a lot of disillusionment with the nonprofit industrial complex. And like, is there any way to, to have community initiatives that people trust their money with? So that's, yeah. That's the purpose it serves. And it's already fully existing and built, and is something that has been worked on for more than 3 years now. I started a couple of years ago using and working on it. And the 2.0 is just going to make it a lot more smooth and useful for everyone, so that these commons can have that integrated into their whole stack of tools they can use to manage their communities.
Yeah,
accountable escrow.
Two things on Giveth. Number one, we started it almost 3 years ago, and the blockchain space has evolved a lot. We were never able to get it user friendly enough for the people that we wanted to use it, because it is a donation platform, and it was intended to have impact on the ground for people, normal people. But we could never get the UX good enough that to the point where we thought this would actually help someone instead of hurting them, because they'd have to figure out MetaMask and figure out all these things. But now the tools are so much better. And that's why we want to do a 2.0 version, because we have better. When we started, we had to do a sidechain, and there were no sidechains. There were no open source block explorers. We had to do all of these hacky solutions, honestly. But now there's like amazing tools that if we start fresh, we can actually build a really good product that can have an impact on the ground. And the number two piece of this is the way it actually fits in is very critical. What Giveth allows us to do is be an interoperable proposal framework, so that I can make a proposal, kind of like making a grant proposal. And when I put it out there, instead of having to make a grant proposal to Moloch, to Metacartel, to YangDAO, to all of these DAOs, I just make one Giveth proposal. And then everyone can see it. Every commons can see it. If there's a commons that's like a global warming commons, and then there's a local environmental commons, they can both fund the same proposal. And when they fund those proposals, what's also important is that like in our baseline system, we are using stable tokens, right? But for these economies to be powerful, they really benefit from being circular, where the people who earn money receive not the money that's in the escrow, the stable currency, but actually tokens in the commons. Because number one, this adds value to the community at large, because we're using our currency instead of someone else's currency. Number two, they have valuable input. They are on the ground working, and we want their opinion, if they can afford to hold some of the tokens, will be really valuable to future input. So Giveth will allow us to ensure that we have the escrow in the stable token like DAI. And then at the moment that the person collects it, they get the community token, which is volatile, but they get exactly 1,000 DAI worth of, or if it was a proposal for $1,000, then they would get 1,000 DAI worth of those community tokens. And they don't have to worry about the fluctuation of the price or anything like that until they hold the token. So this is my piece on Giveth. But hey, so
yes.
Yeah, go ahead, Kris.
No, yeah, you can. I was just gonna say, indeed, like first, like we're indeed gonna move for the people who have more questions to online town. So you have the link here in the chat. But first of all, like for people who would not join us on the other side, thank you so much for all the fantastic questions. It was really inspiring to us as well to have so many people joining. Really happy that we made it through all of the questions. If you have more things, just like join our chat. We're there every day, 24/7, and there's a big community that also answers questions. So you go to t.me/commonstack, and yeah, so thank you so much, and also so many, really a lot of thanks to my dearest colleagues, to Zargam, who just left, who had to leave, to Lorelei, to Jeff, to Griff, and yeah, thanks to all of you. Any final words, Griff?
No.
Okay, well, thank you. Thanks for watching, and thanks for joining. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye. Yeah, and join this online town. It's kind of crazy little 2D world where we can have multiple conversations all at once.
Great.
Make sure your mic isn't echoey.
Yeah,
Yes,
it's
very
definitely
important.
best with